Welcome back, Hnrs. All right, welcome to your weekend flip. Welcome back to, ironically enough, the house where I accidentally brought my football from school to. But we're going to pick up right where we left off in class when we were talking about the founding myth of Rome, which y'all found extremely hilarious where we left off, right? But just a quick review, right? Quick overlay. We left off talking about how these two children were going to be born to a Vestal virgin, right? This woman was actually not born to be a Vestal virgin. She was forced to go there by her uncle. Her uncle had just recently overthrown her father, right? Numitor, the leader of this place called Alba Longa. And what ends up happening, though, is she apparently something comes flying out of a fire, and then apparently ends up pregnant though with twins, right? So, and apparently, what are you doing over there? Just creeping in my flip right now. What you want to talk about? You want to talk about Rome, huh? You want to talk about how two babies were saved by somebody like you? Actually, it's pretty interesting. All right. So anyway, this is Josie. So big thing though going into it, right? So these babies are born, right, to this virgin, and apparently their real father is that of Ares, right? Or not Ares in the sense, because Romans don't call Ares Ares, they call him Mars, right? So their father must have, according to some mythical versions, it was Mars, right? Their mother gives birth to them, and what ends up happening is their uncle, Big Al, as we're calling him right now, because I can never say his name properly, their uncle finds out about it, right? Finds out that their mother has given birth to them, even though he made their mom a Vestal virgin, and he demands that these babies, right? Hold on, Josie. This is part of the story over Reich. He demands that these babies be killed, right? Demands that these babies be, beheaded by a couple of soldiers. So he sends a few soldiers out into the field. He's like, you go get those twin boys, and you kill them, right? You kill them, and you make sure it happens. Well, the soldiers get out there, and they've got these two little babies named Romulus and Remus in their hands, right? And they're like, we can't just kill them. We can't just murder these two babies. So we'll let the gods decide what happens, right? So they take the babies, they put them in a basket, right? And they put the basket on the edge of the Tiber River. And it's flood season, right? So they're like, all right, if the gods want them to live, the flood will save them or it will kill them, right? It'll really be up to them. And then according to the myth, the god of the river in Roman culture that starts with a D, and I can never remember what it is, apparently shows up and saves them by bringing just enough floodwaters to carry them down the river, right? And come here, Josie. Just enough floodwater to carry them down the river. And what ends up happening, Josie, is apparently what ends up happening is they're saved by Lupa, right? Lupa is spelled Lupa, and Lupa is a she-wolf, Josie. She-wolf, right? Look at her. You could have saved some babies, right? So now, and this she-wolf apparently saves them from the flood and nurses them back to health, right? Until later a shepherd shows up, chases the she-wolf off, and then raises the children as his adopted own, right? Him and his wife do. So they raise these two children, and then later on, right, what ends up happening is they end up going out and they live in Alba Longa. They live in the city, but they have no idea who they are. They have no clue who their mom is. They have no idea that they're like a prophet. I know you love the story. Bring the she-wolf back. All right, so Lupa's the best. All right, well, hold on. All right, Lupa's gone now. And then what ends up happening is the boys end up existing in Alba Longa. They get noticed originally, and one of them gets arrested at one point, right? I think it's Remus gets arrested. And then their grandfather, Numitor, actually sees them. He's like, wait, those are my grandchildren, right? Those are my grandchildren, the ones that are supposed to help me retake Alba Longa away from my brother. And then they team up with their grandfather, they save the day, and they liberate Alba Longa from their oppressive government, and they reinstall their grandfather as king, right? Isn't that right, Josie? They reinstall their grandfather as king, but then, wait, there's more. According to the myth itself, the boys then decide that they want to go off, and they're now like in their 20s, right? They're young men. They now decide they're like, we are destined to start our own kingdom. We do not want to rule over Alba Longa as descendants of Numitor. We want to go start our own kingdom. So they strike out to start their own kingdom, right? And they find a very special place on the edge of the Tiber River, right? They see this place on the edge of the Tiber River, and it's a perfect spot because it has 7 Count them, 7 hills, right? I'm not done with my story yet. Come back. Now, so they find it, and then it's on top of 7 hills right next to the banks of the Tiber River. They settle upon those hills because it would protect from the seasonal floodwaters. This is just how genius, apparently, these men are, right? But then they can't decide which hill to build the capital on, right? Where to build the main settlement, right? And they're arguing between 2 hills, right? Apparently it's Aventine Hill, which is Remus, right? Remus wants to settle it on Aventine Hill. And Romulus wants to settle it on Palatine Hill, right? Palatine being the modern origin for the word palace, right? Hence, like, why later on, really? You're no fun. Rufio. Boy Wolf, come here. No, you sleeping? You're no fun. All right, anyway, so big thing, though. They're arguing over which hill to settle on, right? Can't decide which one. And it's either Palatine Hill or Aventine Hill. And they decide to, again, leave it up to who? Leave it up to the gods, right? And so they have a bird-watching competition, right? It's called a practice of augury. It's what it's actually called. And not augury, but augury. And what ends up occurring, though, is Remus is like, look, there's like 6 birds above my hill. That means the gods want us to settle there. And then Romulus says, ha, I got 12 birds over my hill. We're supposed to settle there. So they agree to start the major settlement on top of Palatine Hill. But then one day, Remus, right, decides to defy his brother's orders, hops his walls. They get into an argument over the government ruling style of Rome, and Romulus, yaga, stabs Remus and literally becomes the first king of Rome, right? Hence why his name is Romulus. He is basically Mr. Rome, right? He names the area after himself, right? Now, that is the founding myth, right? Romulus stabs Remus, becomes the first king of Rome, right? And goes on to lead Rome to prominence. And we'll talk about some other elements of the story in class, right, like the Sabine women and the people who helped him settle it and stuff like that, which actually truly relates to this entire part. There were real founders, though, right? There were actual real founders. Romulus probably never existed. Some first king definitely existed, but we have no way of knowing if it actually is going to be referred to as Romulus or not. Actually, they have a word that was the real first name of the city, which was actually founded by these people. They were called the Latins, right? The Latins showed up in this area of Italy, right? And they began to settle along the Tiber River as well. But what ended up occurring is one small group of the Latins, right, which is where they got their language from, right, like the Latin language or originating from the Latin people, a small group of them decided to break away, right? Now, this could kind of be the sense of the mythical founding where Romulus and Remus were like, we don't want to be a part of this other city, right? Because Alba Longa was a Latin city as well. And then a small group of them were like, we don't want to be a part of Alba Longa. They went and decided to go found what you now call Rome. But they have an actual name for what Rome was originally. It's like Septicimus or Rome's first name? Why can't I type right? Not rhymes. Rome's first name. And they have a big celebration of it actually every single year. And I think it's Septicimus, and yeah, so. And it means 7 hills, right? It means the city of 7 hills. And so, but the big thing is they actually eventually refer to it as Rome after their founding myth, after their founder Romulus, right? Now, the interesting part about it, though, is Rome started off as a very, very kind of just regular-looking city, right? This is actually going to be the very first settlements ever built in Rome, right? They were huts made out of mud and reed, right? They had walls built out of this stuff called wattle and daub, right? Now, the big thing about it, though, is that Rome isn't like its myth in the sense of it just shot marble up out of the ground and we have these grand temples to Jupiter running around all over the place. It's not like that, right? This was their original settlements, right? They were just a small group of people that originally spoke this language that you would refer to as Latin, right? So, now, interestingly enough, though, there are elements of the story that are very factual, right? So, Rome was founded on a hill overlooking the Tiber River, and we do believe that the oldest settlements of Rome actually existed right on top of Palatine Hill, right? We have found, archaeologists have found like trash pits and like other like areas where refuse was discarded that actually shows wattle and daub like houses that have been knocked down and then stored in these areas. So they were founded on these original hills. Now also, like there were more hills than just the 7, but according to the myth, it's the 7 main hills of Rome. Now, Rome was founded on this river overlooking the Tiber River, and the Tiber River was stocked full of volcanic ash and silt, and it did flood seasonally, making the farmland in Rome very, very good, right? The settlement would eventually grow to cover all 7 hills, though, and they would use this to help them protect from flooding, right? So these are the 7 hills of Rome in the 1st century BC. So this is like close to Caesar's era. This is way down the line. People claim that in 753 BC, Romulus stabs Remus, becomes the first king of Rome, right? So now these are the major hills, though. This is the one that Romulus wanted, Palatine Hill, and then you got Aventine Hill, the one that what's-his-face, Remus wanted. But then you have several others like Quarnal, Viminal, Cerveteri, or that's the wall, actually, Esquiline Hill, right? You have these large hills, and then you have this area in the middle of them, right? Now, what you see it called right now is the Forum, but what it originally started out as was a really, really nasty kind of bog area because it was very squishy and muddy all the time. So a lot of times the Romans would actually turn it into a cemetery, right? It was actually like home to a lot of early dead bodies and stuff like that. And we actually have some of our best, oh, that's my wife. Some of our best like archaeological finds actually in this area down here because they had several dead bodies inside of it, and we could actually see the prominence of some citizens versus the poor version of some other ones and things like that. So, but that original middle area was actually a cemetery. It wasn't actually even in the Forum yet, right? But started out as just a very simple settlement, right? Mud huts, like trying to use the river's floodwaters the best they could. So Rome started off very humbly, right? Very, very humbly. And they were also, this is very important, jot this down, they were surrounded by several other groups of people. Some of these people include the Sabines, right? Sabine. Some of these other people include somebody to the north called the Etruscans, which we're going to talk about here in about 2 seconds, right? Some other ones actually include, the Alba Longans, which are like the ones that they originally branched off of. So they have tons and tons and tons of other tribes that actually existed around them. They weren't just isolated and alone. They actually existed amongst many other people that were settling in Italy due to the great farmland and the seasonal flooding, right? So, but this is important to know that this teeny tiny little village is going to eventually grow to have an empire that like mocks the size of the United States today, right? So this, of course, is the Tiber River, and actually I took this picture while my wife and I went to Rome, and this is in November, so you can see that this is actually during the fall season, so this is actually pre-flood season. There was some major rainstorms that came before that, that's why the water looks so muddy, but that water is full of that silt and that volcanic ash, the lifeblood of Roman farmland. And this right here is actually a picture of my wife doing a handstand on top of, I believe it's... So Palatine Hill's here, so she would have been on Esquiline Hill, right? She's doing a handstand on Esquiline Hill, right? I've said headstand so many times, but still, it's a big deal. It's one of the major hills of Rome, right? And then, of course, that again is the map of Rome. But there's another group of people that we just talked about, right? We said the Sabines, the Alba Longans, and all these other folks that were running around in Italy at this time. The major one, though, is these people called the Etruscans, right? Now, the Etruscans kind of almost were this close to being much more powerful and much more larger and kind of just like subjugating Rome and turning them into just like some simple citizens. The Etruscans, though, were a major area to the north of Rome, and they actually grew to be very, very large, and they were much more advanced than the Romans were when the Romans originally founded themselves, right? And they actually are going to trade with the Greeks. They're going to share their culture. They're going to adopt the toga, the phonetic alphabet from trading with the Greeks down in Sicily, and they're going to actually figure all these things out. So the reason why Rome is so much like Greece is because the Greeks traded with the Etruscans, right? The Etruscans then took over Rome for a certain amount of time, which we'll talk about here in about 2 seconds, and also make sure you write the dates down because I wrote it down wrong on this Prezi. I made this thing like 2 years ago. But the Etruscans, so you could technically argue that Rome is a combination of 3 peoples, right? So jot this down. Rome is a combination of the Latins, which are their original settling group, the Etruscans, which eventually took them over, and the Greeks, because they traded with those Etruscans, sharing their cultural values, cultural diffusion, and like actually pushing these ideas forward, right? So the big thing about it, though, is the Etruscans did at certain times control what you would call Rome, right? And 753, wrong year. 753 is when Romulus stabs Remus, right? This is the kingdom period in a whole. It's actually closer to like 619 BC. So for close to 100 years, give or take, right, there were Etruscan kings of Rome, right? And Brooke Murray, smart enough to know about Servius Tullius, was the very first Etruscan king, right? And then we had another one named Tullius Superbus, right? Who was supposed to be like Tullius the Arrogant, okay? So, or Tullius the Proud. And they had 3 Etruscan kings that would actually rule over all of Rome until the Romans actually completely drove them out, right? And there's an entire story behind it that you can ask me about if you want to know about it. Like, oh, Mr. Terry, why did they run the Etruscans out? What actually happened? It has to do with a lot of very intense themes that we will talk about in class as well, talking about like stealing women and all this other crazy stuff, and like about the Rome's cultural foundings. But the Etruscans are going to leave major things behind, right? Now, these are very, very important items. The Romans will expel the Etruscans in 509 BC, and the last king of the Romans will be an Etruscan king, right? And that's that guy I just said, Superbus, right? The arrogant. And so what ends up occurring, though, is since the Etruscans controlled them, they built these walls around Rome, trying to keep it protected. Apparently, also, one of the first Etruscan kings built the very first sports arena in Rome, known as the Circus Maximus, which we'll talk about again later on, right? Actually built by an Etruscan king. It wasn't really built so much, it was like some wood stands around a dirt track. But still, right, they actually contributed to Roman society. And many things that we're now considering Roman, that we talk about as being Roman, originally came from the Etruscan people, right? Things like the phonetic alphabet that would be altered to suit the needs of the Etruscan language would then be later altered to suit the needs of the Latin language. And the Roman alphabet is almost the exact same alphabet that we use now, right? So that is a major, major foot forward. The Etruscans actually taught this alphabet to the Romans. The Romans learned how to use it, and they wrote in their language of Latin with it, right? They also wore togas. The wealthy elite wore togas, though, okay? Etruscan wealth wore togas. The Etruscan kings wore togas, right? But that became a status symbol in early Rome, and so later on, senators, consuls, tribunes, and the wealthy ruling classes of Rome end up also wearing togas because of their Etruscan founders, right? Now, the biggest one, though, definitely has to be this thing, right? This is an Etruscan symbol of authority and power, right? That thing right there is called the fasces, right? And you should have wrote all these things down, and I really am going to start stepping away from saying you got to write this down, because just write it down. If I'm hovering over a picture for a long period of time and identifying them specifically, you should probably just jot it down, right? So now, jot this down. But that is the fasces, right? Fasces. This is that axe object that some of y'all guessed correctly in that pre-assessment, right? But the fasces is very important. The Etruscans actually invented it to serve as an image of the ruling authority of the 3 Etruscan kings of the Roman culture, right? And what the fasces is it's just a symbol, right? It's a symbol of ruling authority, and I showed you the picture of it on the backs of the Senate walls in the United States, right? It's a symbol of ruling Roman government power, right? Following the Etruscan occupation. And what it is wooden rods wrapped around an axe, right? And the wooden rods are supposed to represent the people, and the axe is supposed to represent the leadership or the government of Rome, right? Trying to show this union of people and state and power, right? And this thing became a very major image of the ruling class, but particularly a major image of the dictator of Rome, right? Because Rome is going to set out and start conquesting massive amounts of land in Italy, right? So big thing is once they liberated themselves from the Etruscans, they pushed the Etruscans out in 509 BC, and they start ruling with what they call their republic, right? So they adopt a republic government that has no king, right? So a big thing that you got to understand, just jot it down somewhere in your notes, maybe back towards the Etruscan stuff following their expulsion. Rome adopted a republic style, right? And a big part about Rome was no kings ever, right? They moved away from it, which is a big reason why our boy Caesar gets stabbed later on, right? So because they were like, he's going to make himself king. So now, really quick though, Rome, following the expulsion of the Etruscans, is going to set out and start taking over other small territories, right? Like the Sabines, they conquer them. The Albolongans, they conquer them. They actually go off and conquer the Etruscans later on as well. Now, they end up getting into some large wars and stuff like that, but the Romans seem to be being pretty successful, right? They actually get out there. They almost lost a major one, though, to these people known as the Aqui people, I believe is how it's pronounced. But they're a tribe that's actually on the other side of not on the other side of the Apennine Way, but right at the base of the Apennine Mountains, right? and they almost lost this major battle, and their progress stopped going nearly as far forward, right? And so this major story in this moment in the conquering of the whatever they are, the people that start with the A, I cannot, like, so many Latin words. I'm actually, girls, if y'all know how to pronounce that word, please come up and help me out, all right? So, like, tell me, because I struggle with pronouncing anything in Latin, all right? So, now, given that fact, though, so what ends up happening is the Republic then establishes a new tradition, right? They don't want kings, and this is majorly important, okay? But they were in a massive war, and the Senate itself could not rule effectively and couldn't lead the army efficiently, right? So they needed someone to come in and help, right? They needed someone to come in and rule the army and guide Rome forward during a time of war, right? So what they adopted was a tradition known as the dictator, right? So during a time of war, jot this down, during a time of war, Rome would elect a dictator, right? And the very first dictator of Rome, this mythical man of Rome, was known as Cincinnatus, right? And that right there is a statue of Cincinnatus. And according to Roman tradition, myth, and folklore, what ended up happening is the Senate went up to Cincinnatus because he was a former general himself of the Roman military, right? Of Roman military in its infancy. I know in your mind you're imagining, because y'all, so many of you have taken Latin, and so many of you have seen pictures of legionnaires and legionaries, and like the complex structure of the Roman military. We're not quite there yet. This is barely a hoplite army, right? Like, this is barely some dudes with some like simple iron armor and just like stabbing some folks. Now, anyway, but this guy was one of the former leaders of the Roman military, and this guy is Cincinnatus, right? And Cincinnatus was begged by the Senate to stop what he was doing and come back out of retirement and lead the Roman army to victory, because they needed him, right? And they told him, we will give you complete control over the government. So with the appointing of Cincinnatus, you now have the dictator. He's the very, very first one, right? And according to the story, they went up to him, and Cincinnatus, as you can see behind him, is holding a plow, right? Apparently Cincinnatus was in retirement, was just farming, right? He was just a farmer by this point, and he was just trying to provide for himself and his family. And they went up to him, and they were like, Sir, Cincinnatus, please stop farming and come and help us. And all he did was he took his hand, and he wiped the sweat off his brow, he flicked it off, and he said, okay. And he goes off and he leads Rome to victory in 2 weeks, in 15 days, right? In 15 days, he leads Rome to victory over the the A people, leads them to victory over this other tribe that neighbors them nearby. And what does he do after the fact? This is monumentally important. Put a star next to it. He gave power back, right? Apparently, after he defeated these people, he gave power back to Rome, and this is the image of him giving his fasces back to the people in the Republic of Rome, right? And he then retires and just goes back to farming again, right? And the modern-day city of Cincinnati, Ohio, is named after this man, right? So, like, it's actually named after him, and he's a major figure throughout Roman history. You need to know him. He's very, very important, all right? And then what's going to end up occurring is, now as we can see, a very big trend of Rome during the Republic period is to go off and take over other people, right? And they kind of hit a speed bump, right? Because there's people known as the Gauls show up in 390 BC, and they attack, sack, and destroy the fledgling little baby Rome that it was, right? But we're going to stop there so you can just jot this down. We have a great story that we're going to tell in class. There's a goose and a ransom and like all this other crazy stuff. And we're going to talk about like the establishment of Rome. We're going to talk about how we're talking about this stuff kind of out of order a little bit, just talking about the culture of Rome and how a little baby village actually grew to be such a monumental power, right? But we're going to stop here. Hope y'all have a great weekend. I'll see you guys later. Y'all have a good one.